this jail being built, our citizens of Baltimore City does not want it being built here, but the state says they're going to build it anyway. So here, getting the word out, we're educating each other. Tonight there's teaching, so we're educating each other on this issue and making the community aware of
what's wrong with building jails for bad people who break laws. What's wrong with that?
The problem with that is if you take preventative methods in order to stop those things from happening, and actually investing in our youth the way Baltimore City hasn't done in like decades, then we start not to see these many youth being locked up.
Let me ask that question again. What's wrong with building jail for people who do bad things? What's wrong with it?
There are ways that we can prevent this jail from being built by reinvesting.
They're spending multi-million-dollar project, over $100,000 to build a jail. I think one of the great things for others is that you think there's a better way to spend it.
Yes.
Okay, don't let people get so what's wrong with building this jail? Why are you guys still against it?
Well, the main reason is because the money isn't being spent in the right way. So by reinvesting in our rec centers and schools especially, which have been dramatically underfunded for a long time, putting the money where it matters, showing our youth who actually care, and sending the message that we're rather investing in schools than jail to life.
There you go. Thank you very much.
Being a jerk. Y'all ready to start? Alright. Do you mind if I live stream it too? Alright. Alright folks, we're gonna get started with the teaching. So come on over here. Don't make me use the mic check. You. Oh, sorry. We're gonna get started with the teaching.
We're gonna get started with the teaching.
Right now.
Right now.
Y'all can do better than that.
Mic check! Mic check!
Mic check!
Mic check!
I'll be damned if I'm gonna let O'Malley lock me.
I'll be damned if I'm gonna let O'Malley lock me.
I'll be damned if I'm gonna let O'Malley lock me.
I'll be damned if I'm gonna let O'Malley lock me.
I'll be damned.
I'll be damned.
Just cause you build a jail doesn't mean you stop the crime. You just create a place where we will die in mind. One dude want our shoes, the other want our hinds.
What do you
say?
Woo! How you like this evening, this night. Listen, we are working hard out here, okay? Alright? So, everybody, keep up your spirits. Keep up your efforts, okay? 2 days he served his time. But prison not out his mind. He forced to sell crack because no job because of the time. I'll be damned if I'm gonna let O'Malley lock me. I'll be damned if I'm gonna let O'Malley lock me. I'll be damned if I'm gonna let O'Malley lock me. I'll be damned if I'm gonna let O'Malley lock me. Lock me, lock me. Ladies and gentlemen, LBS.
Woo!
So what we want to do is, we want this to be a really communal activity. We don't see ourselves as people imparting knowledge that you all don't already possess, but we kind of see ourselves as being in the process of stimulating a communal conversation that may help us develop a sense of direction for the energies that we want to use in order to challenge the prison-industrial complex, the school-to-prison pipeline. First, I just want to talk a little bit about Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. We're a very new organization, started August of 2010. All of us have background in intercollegiate policy debate. And we want to use the skills of public policy, equip young people with a sense of political education that will give them the tools to speak for themselves. And that actually allows me to transition into the first point that I want to make. And what's going to happen is I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the empirical and personal things that happen when you have people that have intimate contact with the criminal justice system in a way that undermines our livelihood. And then Lawrence is going to talk more about the theoretical aspects of the prison-industrial complex and school-to-prison pipeline. So the first thing that I think is very important for us to realize is that we have to understand that those whose voices are silenced as a result of the school-to-prison pipeline are people that often are not represented in the places where people make the decisions, right? So when we talk about, how do we improve the quality of life, particularly of black males, who are the ones that are the most under assault as a result of the prison industrial complex, unfortunately, many of us aren't participants in the conversation to the extent that we're supposed to be, right? And the question that we want to ask ourselves is, why is that? Why is it that black men, those who are the most assailed as a result of the prison industrial complex, not those who are the most prominent voices in the places that the decisions are made? And one of the things that I want to submit to you is that it is intentional, that we live in a society structured in such a way, right, where there are certain people that have privileges and power, and others of us that don't. And what makes it even worse is that whenever black men organize ourselves in such a way to challenge the structures of domination in our society, what ends up happening is that we're seen as a threat. One of the beauties of the Occupy movement is that it allows us to latch on to the privileges that white bodies have, right? Because one thing that I want to make clear is that I think what is good about the Occupy movement is that it's been able to mobilize people and create a conversation around things that affect everyone. One of the things that it affords us the opportunity to do is coalition build in such a way, right, where it actually has the possibility of allowing people like us to be able to be in the forefront of the conversation. And that is a very important model for liberatory action, right, to be able to have those who are most affected be able to be at the microphone with the support of those who want to put their bodies in the gears of the machine in order to break down the structure that causes suppression in the first place. The other thing I also want to bring up is the fact that if we look at the education system, we cannot talk about the prison industrial complex unless we talk substantively about the education system in this city and we understand the education system as a holding cell for the prison industrial complex. One of a very important scholar, his name is Amos Wilson, says that education should train its young people to protect its national interests. Unfortunately, what happens is that the national interests that are indoctrinated into the minds of young people in Baltimore City are not our national interests, right? They're the national interests of those who profit off of the privatization of prisons, right? Who profit off of the fact that you can employ more people if you build more prisons, right? Not understanding of the economics behind that are such that it undermines the ability for all working people to coalesce and be able to have an economy that is indigenous, where we have control and agency over the nature of our economics in the city. The other thing that I also want to bring up is the fact that when we look at the issue of racism in this society, right, we look at the implications that it has in our lives, it's very important for us to understand that if we're not talking about the structures of racism and white supremacy in America, and we're not talking about it in such a way we understand its political ramifications. So I'm not talking just in terms of overt forms of discrimination, right? We need to understand racism and white supremacy from the perspective of understanding it as a system of domination that is embedded in every major institution in our society. If we don't understand white supremacy as the foundation for these different structures of domination, then we will be confused. We will not properly understand the phenomena that exist in our society. All the social science data that exists suggests that white supremacy is that foundational organizing political principle. I'll give a few examples. All right, the first is that black people in America constitute 14% of those who engage in drug activity. But we are almost 65% of those that are prosecuted and convicted for drug offenses, right? There's no other way to explain that phenomenon but the structures of white supremacy and racism. The other example that I'll give is that if we look at the way that the education system in our society is organized, right, and we look at the curriculum that is in our school system, right, what we see is that we see a lot of representations of American society that in many ways disempower notions of upliftment for young black people. And what I mean is that if we look at the heroes that people pick, right, we look at the heroes that we're taught about, many of the heroes that we're given are not heroes that are going to help us understand how to organize ourselves as black people in this country to be able to understand our particular situation, right? And that's not done by accident, right? This doesn't mean that people shouldn't have intercultural education. This doesn't mean that people shouldn't have intercultural interaction. But what this means is that you have to structure your education system in such a way where the people in the society understand the structure of racism. The very invisibility of it is an example of the structure of white supremacy. You can perpetuate its existence if you omit it, and therefore people do not even know that it exists. And that's one of the biggest things that we struggle with. Not even just in terms of white supremacy, although it's foundational. When you look at the whole notion of the 1% and 99%, if those fundamental facts of the of the disparities, the inequities that exist in healthcare, the inequities that exist in education, if those things are omitted from your public education, then you are disarming the people who are going to become leaders from having the skills to protect their own interests. And if we don't do that, then it's going to be impossible for us to turn this thing around. And so we hope as leaders of a beautiful struggle and coalescing with other groups to not only just make noise about the issue, but also to help people understand the foundational structure in this society that if we don't address, we will not be able to sufficiently deal with the problems that we face. And I want to turn it over to Lawrence.
Woo!
To be perfectly honest, I didn't know I was speaking tonight, so what I'm going to say is going to come a little bit off the top of my head, but I think I have a good idea of what I want to try to communicate. It may not be as clear as I want it to be, but I'll give it a shot. There are certain spaces where many of us here have many of the same goals, and as such, I want to frame my discussion in terms of there are certain questions that many of us have and different ways we approach those questions. I want to explore some of the similarities and differences to different theories of power, resistance, and struggle in the reflection of some of the academic work that I've been doing with House and Debate Team. And I chose this topic because I've talked to some of the people here. I know there are people who read Foucault, people who read Marx, people who read different existential philosophies, and it's my personal opinion as part of LBS that all of these tools are useful if and when they can be mobilized to political change. And I want to try to do some exploration using some of these tools with what I hope is a more tangible, clear political outcome that I think more accurately reflects the extremely complex interacting systems of power that all those different things support. So when I heard school to prison pipeline, which is what I kind of wanted to talk on, for this crowd, I saw a lot about Michel Foucault. And I thought about the thesis I wrote about the way he talks about power. Why do schools look so much like prisons in their architecture, in the structure and the logic of how bodies are functioning in those spaces? I bring it back to a comment I heard a long time ago that I truly believe is true. Someone said, when you're dealing with urban schools, the goal is not education, it's social control. And that social control functions in many ways. It functions through the curriculum. It functions in the basic educational structure. And that in many ways shows a critical affinity between the sort of Foucauldian work and a sort of critical race analysis. In addition to that, however, I think the question of surveillance, which I think is a very appropriate question given our current situation here, can guide us into some more complex understandings of what some of all this may mean when you throw it all together and try to figure something out. So I wrote a paper for the school I went to in the state of Washington. It was about surveillance, and I wrote it because I realized that I walked out the door of my house, which is in 21216 Poplar Grove in Winchester, and I realized I could go an entire day with being on camera every single second that I was outside of my house. You go out, there's a blue light. You're on the bus, MTA camera. To the school, cameras in your stairwell. You're in class, the teacher is the force of surveillance. You repeat it all when you go home, and if the blue light doesn't flash into your bedroom, your internal space in your house is the only space you have. That's your own private space. So I was thinking about this question in the way I was taught, to a more traditional, philosophical, postmodern Foucauldian language, and I realized there was something missing. That I just didn't feel it, to be honest with you. And I was trying to theorize some of the distinct ways in a city like this. What exactly was going on? What was I feeling? I wanted to explore that feeling because I felt that could be something that could be politically useful, and I'm going to try to articulate that right now. Going back to the work of someone like Frank Fanon, it's pretty clear that different bodies experience the prison industrial complex, and specifically the question of surveillance, different ways. So when I was doing research, I realized for many people the question of surveillance is a question of individual liberty and constraining my ability to be outside the gaze of the power structure. But for people of color, something different is going on. For people of color, when that gaze is upon you, it's reflecting back on you something that's far deeper. And I realized what was happening in these urban neighborhoods, these black urban neighborhoods, was something much deeper than the education I got and allowed me to understand. It's an academic term called the phenomenological return to self that people like Frantz Fanon and George Yancey talk about. And that's why I realized I was experiencing something different, something that takes this idea of a prison industrial complex surveillance and makes it not just a question of political allocation or poor people being surveilled, but makes it a question of fundamentally how we experience our lives and what it means for different people to experience the city in different ways. I realized that all of the negative images of what a black man was supposed to be, a criminal, a thief, a murderer, I had to think about that every time I saw a blue light, every time I was under surveillance. So for me, that raises a really important question about this structure of the prison industrial complex. What I want to argue is that not only are we building prisons, allocating and investing in controlling bodies, but the very structure of the way that this society has begun to function creates prisons for many people in the way they experience their lives. And those are some of the questions that really interest me. And those are the questions I would like to see more fundamentally ingratiated into the politics of different groups. Because one thing that we do have here is a space where different people have different political abilities. But I want to continue to push that there are different questions, different political questions that different groups ask. And sometimes this is a hard question for us to really, truly deal with and grapple with, because we have such a desire, as we are trained to believe that we're all human, we all have the basic structure. One point I want to make is that we can be different and we can have the same goal, but the job is to embrace those differences and to work with those in mind as opposed to pushing them aside. So that's one of the things I wanted to bring up, is the different structures of the problems that people have. And I've talked about this in some different places I've been. Marxists in the crowd, the question of redistribution that addresses the fundamental problem for many bodies, for many people who are put in the political situation. That is the fundamental question. There are other people who also have other fundamental questions. It's not just a question of poverty. It's not just a question of the resources that are designed to create structures like this. As a friend of mine said, there is the question of bodies being put in prison to produce for capital, but there is also the question of why those bodies are black bodies. And that's the question that I want to argue doesn't just become part of our politics. I think it's something very fundamental to the way we all live in this society. Because of the racialized history of this country, it creates certain ways that we exist in the world, where UC Irvine Professor Frank Woodson said, in our very bodies, black men experience their life as a prison. So the school-to-prison pipeline functions even before people get into school. It is the structure of how people understand themselves in the world. You know you're a problem in this city if you're black and male. Everything before you even know what a prison is tells you that. And so that's what I want to explore, and that's what I urge people in the crowd to explore when you're formulating your politics. Because this is where I think theory can be useful, when it takes us, sees our orientation, and potentially routes us in a more productive direction. I always wonder about the question of redistribution and how it's so essential that we take the funds allocated to this space and put it towards programs that educate people, and put it towards programs that give people ideal situations. But there is also, I think, a secondary and very important question of what is the structure of the type of education we would like to have. I wouldn't very much like the current structure of education because it replicates the needs of power that man. I also wonder in a very fundamental way, at a theoretical level, the question of redistribution, how can you ever have a liberated state on stolen land? A Native American would definitely have a much different conception of what it means to occupy space. They'd probably say it's already been occupied. So there are different types of questions that our politics ask. But I think what I came to realize is one animating question, one animating ethos when I wrap up, is that there is this question of what it means to be human. And there are different structures that impede the possibility for people to be human in different ways based upon your history. But I think that call for that to have a deep, true, fundamental humanity that we all can reach for and all can affirm means that we must analyze these differences. We must correctly analyze the structures of power that affect people differently. So I do think the call for all of us to have a chance in this world to experience basic peace and a safe humanity is a powerful call. But that means it's up to us to work extra hard to ensure we actually understand what's necessary for that to take place. So, thank you.
So what we want to do now is we want to make this a little bit more interactive. So first, if you all have some general questions for us, then this will be the time for it. If not, we actually have some questions for you all that we'd like to know what you all think.
Yeah, your young brothers. Lawrence. Hi, Lawrence. I'll tell you what, now I'm going to have to run a little bit because I got to get ready for work. I'm going to tell my friend George Yancey. You gave him a shout out. I'm sure he's going to give you a free copy of his King book when it comes out.
Yeah, George Yancey is also we use a lot.
White Gates, right?
Yeah. A lot of what we use for counseling today, a lot of the
they're just a handful of African American philosophers in the United States, so I couldn't know if you mentioned one.
I know.
I'm going to tell him a young brother named Lawrence, a revolutionary young black philosopher in Baltimore, gave him a shout out at Occupy.
I'll shout you out too. The University of Oklahoma is actually using your work in debate rounds. So,
oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe somebody's going to give me a shout out on Facebook. But it's all good.
Thank you.
Any general ideas before we offer up our own? All right, so I guess the first thing I want to throw out there is how do we increase the scope of the mobilization in the city, right? Because one of the things that we struggle with is that Baltimore has a very fractured social network as it relates to the activist community. And so one of the things that I'm interested in hearing is how do people think we can bridge some of those gaps in order to have a really broad-based coalition mobilizing around this issue?
I think that's going to start to demonstrate the power of that unifying concept and the truth of it. You know, I kind of had this slogan, which is don't be a 2%er. You know, don't be someone who's just in it for what you're going to get out of it, or, you know, the decaying prospects of your life. See this as a real struggle for the 99% and recognize that from the homeless person to the person who's, you know, a college graduate who's in a sea of debt, that we are all, you know, not only are we all victimized by the same system, but that means we have to be taking the fight to the other manifestations of this system at all times and putting our bodies on the line. And I think once some people start to demonstrate that, then it doesn't become just words anymore. And I just hope that these actions, that they start to demonstrate that to the other people who are, you know, rightfully worried or rightfully suspicious that people will just adopt their cause and then abandon it after the attention is over.
For me, I see this as like a two-part question where it's not only about causes that tie us together and finding those causes, but it's also a logistical problem, you know, like finding how to contact these people who are, like, Occupy as a leaderless movement, you know, like how do you get a hold of people who can, like, who use the internet, because not everyone has access to the internet. Like, how are we going to physically get people in the same room together? And that's been a problem with a number of actions that we've tried to pull off. And I'd like to hear about that as well. That.
I think we got to learn how to, when we reach disagreements between different members and groups of the coalition, You know, that we learn how to not fall to the, okay, we disagree, you should do your own thing, and we're going to do our own thing. We have to develop an incredible perseverance to making sure we don't reach that kind of paradigm, continue that paradigm, otherwise maybe we won't form the 99%.
I think improving our ability to engage in rational consideration is often there are debates where the disagreements aren't even clearly defined. You know, people sort of using language very loosely, you know, like capitalism versus social, without ever defining the concept, being clear about what it means. When people disagree, they get pissed off with each other, they stop working with each other, and meanwhile no one is even really clear about what specifically we disagree on, whether it be a matter of principle or strategy or tactics. I think you improve that by simply engaging in, you know, collective deliberation, but also being very critical, you know, and being purposeful about our use of language.
So I think the fractures are mirror the fractures in our educational system, mirror the fractures in our social lives and our religious lives. And so it occurs to me that we should probably be hanging out with each other. And just becoming friends and understanding each other outside of because this is a kind of awkward way of having parties. Like a big movement party or something like that. I don't know. That's a 99% drink.
Well, I have a couple things. One, to your question, I think a leader from Take Back the Land came and spoke to the Occupy Our Homes group, Max Rameau, and he talked about this kind of two-pronged approach, which is he saw it as kind of, you know, the Occupy movement did start in a kind of privileged, it was privileged people who had time to go sit in a park and protest all day, and who had time and kind of security to do that. And that's an important thing, to kind of thrust this debate and argument into the public, to put it on Wall Street. But then there's this other population that's already under attack. They're already in the war zone, you know, and they don't have to go and create a public spectacle of it. And what he saw this part of the struggle as a struggle for land. Their homes are being taken by banks. They're getting terrible lending from, you know, banks that are purposely lending poorly to black people and unfairly. And so that's kind of this two-pronged approach he saw, where there is this kind of privileged group that's able to thrust this argument into the public sphere and make it into this national conversation because, you know, people listen to young white people, and, you know, and then there's the other side, which is actually defending homes and letting these people in the community see you do have a chance to stand up to these powers. The second point was before, when you asked if we had any questions, I am wondering, because you spoke a lot about men and masculinity, sort of, and I'm wondering if there are any, like, women in your group, or, because also the prison population, one of the fastest growing segments is women, and in Maryland especially, like 90% of women prisoners are from Baltimore, and they're pretty much all black. And when you're talking about, you know, the prison mentality getting into your mind before you're even in school, part of that is, you know, there are babies in prison visiting their mother, and like that, you know, babies shouldn't be in those environments. And that's another way that they're tearing apart the family. And with the youth prison especially, I mean, this is for kids. And the fastest growing segment is kids and women. And of course, we've seen what it's done to you know, black men.
Yeah. No, I mean, I really appreciate that comment. I think what's important to recognize in general is that if we look at the black community, one of the history of the black community is the different kinds of gender depression that exist in a white supremacist society. And I think one thing that's very important is for us to recognize the ways that gender intersects with the way that white supremacy is implicated in one's body. So for instance, when Lawrence talked about, you know, the prison mentality being inculcated into you in every major facet of life, you know, that's as a result of a particular orientation that society has towards black men. And I think what is starting to happen is that it's becoming so profitable to incarcerate, right, that now it is a little bit more fashionable to expand the profile of criminality, right, to expand it not just from black male masculine bodies, right, but criminalize an entire people and then criminalize even others in order to justify the structure that exists. But the point, I think, is very well taken in terms, and we do have a woman on Where's Kansas? Multiple women. So there's one here, and but yeah, I definitely appreciate the comment, and I think that's really important to keep in mind as we talk about the prison-industrial complex, not as a static, fixed, historical, structural phenomenon, but as something that is mutating, just like the structure of white supremacy and other forms of domination mutate as well.
Yeah, if I could speak to that again really quickly, I think what Davon's saying is that, again, different people experience themselves in the world in different ways, and if you have this increase in black female imprisonment, part of it is that, again, black women are experiencing a sense of hopelessness in these urban neighborhoods that mirrors what black men think. And they experience it differently. They perhaps experience it through the lens of them not being able to completely ingratiate that social construct of womanhood that's passively embraced in this country. You know, they don't look the way that Beyonce now looks, you know, and that creates, again, a sense of where do I fit into society, and that can lead many women just the same way it leads to men, to feeling so outside the social structure that what they see around them has been historically produced. Serious things like the prison-industrial complex and constant attacks on black people, but it feels normal. And the structures of survival that people have created through the underground economy and through acts of even violence sometimes feels like the only way they can survive. And that is something that affects lots of people who live in these terrible situations. So I think it's important to understand, again, that someone in that different identity space is going to experience themselves differently, and that may lead them to talk different ways or want to be around people who look and feel like them, because they experience their person differently. One of the things I want to try to stress from my talk was it's important for people to understand that that's okay, and that's not an indictment of you. If people of color want to establish a separate space, I think so often, perhaps not consciously, but somewhere deep inside, many white activists feel, why can't you join the movement? What's wrong with us? You know, it's not you. It's a structure that produces a world that makes people experience their lives in very specific ways. And one of the biggest problems that lots of people feel, but feel differently, is a lack of recognition. You feel crazy, for lack of a better word, because I see all this stuff around me, and I don't see anything in larger society that mirrors what I experience. So people are going to seek out people to affirm their views of reality that come from that very specific location. So that's one thing that I want to again stress is, there are going to be times when we do all get together and have a potluck. But there are also going to be times where different people take different political ventures because of the fact they experience that pressure differently. And that's okay. And that's one, again, I think one of the most important things that we can take from that is staying in good communication with one another if and when that happens, but also recognizing that is part of a healthy movement.
Yeah, I agree with the point that you made before about racism is at the heart of every aspect of this society, every structure and so on. I teach high school here in the city, and I'm at college, and you know, the life expectancy is very different for white folks and African American folks. So if you're African American in the United States, you're likely to die about 7 or 8 years younger. So at the school where I teach, we have about 1,700 students. Perhaps 1,500 are African American. You multiply that number of students by 7 or 8 years of life they're going to lose on average. We're talking thousands and thousands of years being snuffed out. So it's a very, very cruel and pervasive thing. But I want to disagree with one point you made, which when you talked about Marxism, or what I would call communism, because I don't believe in making any one individual like a hero, Marx or anybody else. So when we talk about that, I think there have been times in the history of the communist movement when it was the way you described it, which is only interested in the redistribution of resources in an egalitarian way. But I think the communist movement has learned a lot. We look at the various revolutionary struggles, we've learned that there's a very important role for consciousness and culture also. So in China, for example, after they made the revolution, they overthrew the landlords and the business owners. there was still a lot of social inequality that persisted. So like a generation later, you still had kids of the former professional educated classes getting more of a break at college. And so then they had the Cultural Revolution in China to try to combat that. And I think the communist movement has become very aware that you got to tackle racism head on in all our work. That it's the number one way that they divide us, and it's the number one way they super exploit a section of the population, and it makes about a third of their corporate profits. And if the movement's going to be successful for the essential needs of all of us, everybody, no matter what our racial background, has to recognize the primacy of fighting racism. So I don't think we have to be communist to do that.
That definitely wasn't what I was trying to articulate. If people who
my
call
point, I was actually answering.
Yeah, you talk about Marx? I talked about my mistake. I'm getting all my memories now. Yeah, and that when people who focus on redistribution, communism, have those kind of conversations, I think that's incredibly productive. I just wanted to push people to have those types of conversations. You know, I think that it's important, you know, that we don't get caught up in the revolutionary dream and detach that from material reality. Like, you know, Human Union was in China, was like, man, they got it all figured out, you know, they got it going. And of course, so many things happen in America and China that kind of had that dream deferred a little bit. So it's a constant awareness of how the materiality links to the theory is what I was trying to
I want to thank you all so much for having this conversation with us today. I got here late, so if I'm speaking to only the end of the conversation, then that's what I'm doing. But the point that you just made about white activists, trying to encourage white activists to not be too offended when at some times there are black-only spaces. It's so important. It's such an important message. I think I was probably like 23, and I had gotten really excited by and involved with some really radical black organizers, including Reverend Annie Chambers, who may be here today, may have been here yesterday, but has done some incredible work and used to run Big Mama's house, real serious stuff. And then one day I showed up for a training that they had advertised and that somebody had told me about, and they saw me and they went in the room and talked to me and they came back out and said, sorry, this is for only black people. And I was like, what are you talking about? Blah, blah, blah. And went upstairs and you know, I had to really, it took me about a year to really fully come to the realization that that was totally fine. And that they weren't negating me, they weren't questioning who I was, they weren't calling me a cop, they weren't saying that I was part of the problem. They were simply saying that it's really important to sometimes draw a line in the sand and say, absolutely not is anybody who could potentially step in here and say, well, because of my privilege, I'm going to just come in here and we're just going to be us right here. And I also used to have a lot of problems with women-only spaces. And sometimes I still do. I still question them and push, why are we having this? Why is this a woman-only space? And I think it's important to question those things, but I think it's really important to bring this up and have it as a conversation in a mixed group where people can say, this is why, and it's okay, and we're really glad to work together most of the time.
Yeah. Thank you for that comment. Let me make two quick comments in response to that. I think, again, it's a question of it not being an intentional situation. Like, if you were in a group full of black men, it's not your fault that you caused those black men to think about the stereotypes of black men by just the very presence of your body. It's a long history that precedes you that creates that dynamic. And it's not that they think you're a cop, it's just that even if it's a psychological situation that dynamic creates, prevents necessary recognition between the people in that group. And that recognition in many ways is so essential for people to feel like they have a safe space in this racist society. So again, that's something that precedes you for hundreds of years. And it's very important that people not take that personally. It's also important for people to realize that the questions of, again, people seeing themselves as authorities, even the situations where you feel that you're helping can sometimes be tacit manifestations of privilege. Like, I'm always cautious about saying things about Foucault or Marx. I haven't read all Foucault. I haven't read all of Marx. And there'll be someone out there who does. And they'll just like, well, let me just help you. Foucault said on page 347, X, Y, Z. I'm just helping you here. It's like, no, I take the part of Foucault to help me articulate my reality and help me affirm myself and affirm a vision on what I think is necessary and effective in society. I don't need to know the entirety of discipline and punishment by heart in order for me to understanding of power, relations, and be able to use that effectively. So even in those situations where, again, you just feel like, I really want to help, the ability to sit down and read Foucault for hours and hours may be in part manifestation of privilege that you don't even recognize. And the inputting yourself as the authority on Foucault may be a situation where you don't realize you're operating under assumptions of sort of, intellectual ability, but it's something that's so tacit that you don't even recognize it's going on. So again, sometimes those spaces will happen. I do want to stress that second part. I do think the voice, not just those spaces happen, but when they do happen, are you paying attention? Because if two people go in the same direction, it's not usually they'll step on each other's toes. And I do think that's something that activists who do enter people of color circles only need to work on in terms of having good communication with different parts of the movement. I really think that is an important part of it.
Ladies and gentlemen, one last question and comment. How do you manage collateral damage, community standards, the jail building practice if the devil done planned it, your levels unbalanced, rotation off axis, educational practice in second place to the package? You see, we got the bandage, let's up like sandwich, repair like Scandis, colonial anguish. I know we can change it, roll over and range it, reconstruct, sustain it. Is it not, ain't it? The picture has been painted of an all-color utopia. Black thought and white thought cornucopia. You know it's hard, so you better grind like it. You know life's short, so spend your time like it. Knowledge is power, so treat your mind like it. Prison is slavery, we do the time like it. They stole our voices, ladies and gentlemen, and we mime like it. And all our people lost, so we should find like it. Thank you. LBS's official presentation is now over, but we encourage you all, get with us, get our phone numbers, get our information, talk to us personally, find out what's going on. We thank you for having us here today. Ladies and LBS, one last time, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah!